each of these points, but if you have a question at any point about any of them, just like feel free to interrupt, or I prefer if you just like raise your hand so it's not total anarchy, but just let us know if something is unclear or you have a further clarification question or anything like that.
We like questions.
Okay?
All right.
Okay, so our first point is just going to be about how to prepare for the 2AC before you can actually give the speech. So what you should be doing during the prep time, what you should be doing before the debate even starts, what you should be doing during the cross-ex, and how much prep you should take, stuff like that. And so the first thing that's kind of important, we'll talk about this more in depth, is just being able to use your partner. I'm just going to put preparation up here, but we're going to talk about other stuff, so you should write that down too if you're taking notes, I guess. So using your partner, what that means is kind of when you go into an app debate, the 1A should not just be like sitting around like highlighting neg files, unless that's kind of just your thing. But they should be kind of, especially before an important debate, should be doing something that's useful to you. So something that I always thought was useful was having them highlight cards that I didn't get to. Or having them organize something that I thought was important, although if you all are paperless, that's less relevant. But having them do something that's useful to you while you can do more preparation-intensive stuff. Another more important thing is kind of knowing what to expect, and that's kind of based not only on the team that you're debating, but also on the app you're reading. And we'll talk more about what to do versus specific teams, but let's just talk about, so let's say you're reading an app and you've been reading it for like half of the year. You should have a general sense of what the best arguments are against it, not only just because those are like community norms, but if you are reading an app, you should know more about it than anyone else in the country. It's kind of what I think should be like your standard. And that might sound difficult, but it's really not if you've been reading an app for a long time and you're actually updating it for every tournament. So what do you think? What do you think is an? Let's take an example from last year's topic. Someone would say an app that was like popular. Coin. Okay, sure. So a lot of people read the Coin app. You're updating the Coin app for every tournament. Surely people are updating their negs too. But if you're actually doing things like having your Google Reader alert you to every article that's coming out about Coin every single day when you're doing your app updates, like 2 weeks before a tournament, if you know what and this is like an extreme example because you obviously have schoolwork and other things to do, but if you know about almost every article that's come out referencing your app in some capacity in the last 2 weeks before a tournament, it's very, very unlikely that you're not going to be able to predict what DA has the best uniqueness in that week before that tournament, or the week of that tournament, I guess. You'll know if a new counterplan has been written about, or if there's new good solvency evidence for an originally crappy counterplan that's now suddenly good because some really qualified person came out with a new article about it. Or maybe, there's suddenly some topicality question, or I don't know, if any of you debate places where inherency is a problem. Just like anything like that, a new article's come out and it says that your app might possibly be done. Those are all things you need to know about, and then, I don't know, whenever I came across one of those, I immediately cut it. I cut it as a neg, as a 2N, in the best possible way that I thought it could be read against me, and then I sent it to everyone on my team and was like, you all should look out for this, cut it for our neg to our app, but also what do people think we should say against it. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, no, continue your thoughts.
So then the use of that is obviously you get feedback from other people that are, useful and smart, but also it's very, very helpful to always be one step ahead of your opponent. If you've cut their strat before they have, your answers are going to be one step ahead too. Because like, for example, let's say you find a new counterplan. A good example of this is just like, there's an app that we read almost all of last year. There was a counterplan that was kind of crappy, I thought, against the app, and we had really good answers halfway through the year. And then suddenly, all of these new articles started coming out about it during winter break, and I realized that it was actually a viable threat. And so the first thing I did is I cut all of the neg cards I could find for it, and then I read them and I was like, where's the best answer to the perm in all of these cards? And when I thought I found it, I was like, all right, we need to write our answers to have either DAs to their answers to the perm, or we need to have built-in answers to their answers to the perm, or we need to write our perm to get out of these really good answers, like a textually tricky perm that avoids the DAs. So stuff like that, that's only possible if you're keeping up with your app. If you want to be a good 2A, you have to be kind of up-to-date aware. I guess preparation is not just knowledge, but it's also willingness to kind of dedicate yourself to that knowledge. So if you just think you're a space expert now, I don't think that is sufficient to fulfill this knowledge condition for preparation, because you also need to do research to improve that knowledge as this topic evolves throughout the year.
So not only should you have knowledge of your app, you need to have knowledge of your opponent. And there's like 3 rounds like immediate preparation, and then there's, you know, behind the scenes, your work the entire year. You guys need to become like dedicated to that wiki. You need to refresh that wiki every time you do debate work, anytime there's anything put up against your app that's applicable, any dissent, any counter plan, any strategy, you should be reading the other team's cards and, you know, doing work in preparation against that. Before the debate round, you should have intel, you should have scouts at tournaments. If, you know, Greenhill breaks a new politics dissent, you should know what that politics dissent is, and you should be making a 2A seed before you debate them. The second you hear that, you know, someone you're going to debate a lot has a new argument, you need to be on top of it at tournaments. So kind of what I always do, you know, we're making our transition to paperless, so this is a little like antiquated, I guess, but when I knew who I was debating, I would scour their wiki and I would start making stacks of 2ACs that might be applicable. I would just like pull out, you know, if they were reading the Skip the DA, I would pull out my Skip the Politics DA, I would know where I put it, I would make a little hat, and I would have that ready to go, and obviously adapt it based on the 1NC. But I'm ready before the debate even starts to debate what I think that they're going to read in the 1NC.
And that's not just based on like their wiki and tournament intel, but and this is kind of like something that we'll talk about later, a later point about just kind of like psychological warfare, but there are certain people who either when they walk into a room and they have certain coaches with them that are talking to them, or just it's a person who you know is not very good at the K, security K is going to be in their 1NC, but it's not going to be in their block, and that should dictate how your 2AC is prepared. So we've talked kind of about, and I'll talk more about that later, but we've talked about kind of pre-tournament preparation, and then there's also a component of pre-round preparation, and that's kind of what Ryan talked about your knowing your opponent and doing wiki stuff, but that's also kind of just like being able to recognize that the team you're debating is likely to read a certain thing, or more importantly, is there a certain thing that you don't usually have time to finish prepping before the 2AR? That's something you should be preparing before the debate starts. So let's say you had a debate, you've debated the Skip DA like 8 times at the past 2 tournaments, and every time the thing that you found has hurt your prep the most, or is the biggest like prep sucker for the 2AR, it's impact calc. That's something I would start prepping before the debate starts. So things like impact calc or time intensive is what I would say. And the reason why I'm hesitant to tell you this is because I hate more than anything people that pre-script out their 2ARs before, like, you know, hours before the debate, because it almost never matches up with what the 2NR said. But if it's something that you like can very clearly predict either what exactly they're going to say, so for impact calc, it's the same time basically. It goes down very similarly every time it's Asia War versus asteroids, right? But if it's, you know, maybe they'll break a new impact to the DA in a block. If that happens, you have to be willing to be flexible and kind of add new stuff on. So be sure that this is like flexible. Yeah, write that down. Nice. And the second component of that is not just things that are time sensitive, but also things that you need. See, it's still like time related, but for time sensitive here, I mean like preparation, like you just don't actually have enough time to write out all of your impact calc stuff. But then there's also just like a lot of things where it requires me to like sit and actually really think about stuff for a while, like competition stuff or perms, or maybe like how weird, like if you want to maybe straight turn a DA, and you don't usually straight, let's say you don't normally impact turn DAs, but you've decided at this one tournament that you've got awesome cards to impact turn to skip the DA. You have to be able to decide before that debate starts whether or not you're either prepared to do that based on thorough research, and also have you read all of those cards, and have you read most of the negs, if not all of the negs, typical cards when people go for that DA, and are you prepared to kind of think of the way that all of those interact in a big impact turn debate before the debate starts? Because I would say generally people that decide to do stuff like impact turn, that decision is made before the debate starts, or if not before the debate starts, like during the 1NC. It never is like a decision where the 1NC cross-X ends and I sit down and finish prepping the 2AC and I'm like, so should I impact turn? Like you've got to know like way earlier than that, like within like the first couple minutes of the 1NC as soon as they introduce this position.
You should also like assess your weaknesses. Like if you're debating a team and you know that they love to rock the conditions counterclaim, and you're not, you know, I wouldn't consider theory to be my best debate attribute. So if I were debating that team before the debate, I would know, hey, I'm going to have the hardest trouble in this debate winning that conditions counterclaims aren't competitive, because that's kind of what I'm not good at. So I'm going to spend a lot of time talking to my partner and kind of writing out arguments and kind of getting a wrap on the thing that I'm not good at before this debate. So know your weakness.
Yeah, that's good. And then the third component of this is during the actual debate. How many people prep their entire 2AC before the cross-ex of the 1NC starts? Like you're just ready to go. Okay, that's really bad. There are 2 reasons why that's really bad. Not that you're really bad, but that strategy is really bad. The first is that even if you've got blocks to everything, there's just no way you could have physically pulled all of your blocks to everything and read enough of their evidence to know if there are some hidden tricks. And okay, so like first thing you have to do is you have to look for tricks. Everyone has them, at least good teams. And what I mean by that is not just like, you know, did they slightly alter their counterplan text, but did the 1NC hide a turns the case card on their 1NC to the disad that they didn't really put in the tag, but the card is clearly interacts with your case? That's something you should look out for, because if you drop that as a 2AC, it's going to be really, really difficult for the 1AR. Same thing with, so like here, I guess like turns case cards, counterplan text. This is a general rule for counterplans, and we'll talk more about counterplans a little bit later. If they read a counterplan, you at a minimum need to read the counterplan, I think twice, the counterplan text twice, if not more, before you're ready to go to get your 2AC on the counterplan. I don't care if the counterplan text is like the president should issue an XO that does your plan. You should read it like 12 times, because you're gonna realize either that they wrote it in a way that means that you have more perm ground, or they wrote it in a way that links to their DA because they didn't think through their text. Or you're going to realize that a bunch of cards you would normally read against that counterplan don't make sense with the way they wrote it. And if you don't do that, you're just like guaranteeing you will read unnecessary stuff from 2AC and miss opportunities to exploit poor preparation by the neg.
And that happens all the time. Just the saddest debate losses in my career have been because I didn't read a counterplan text carefully. So just do it over and over.
K-tricks. That's so crucial. Like, I'd say there's like a 90% chance they're going to read a K, and they're going to say that there's only one link in the 1NC, but there are more links. Like, you should read their link card. Like, there will be other links. Wait, what did you
Just the blow up of the links.
Ryan's my actress. I agree with you. So, like, more link tricks and also impact stuff. Like, their impact card is like, they're going to have a tag that's like, this is bare life. You know, it's in that bare life card, a value to life argument, like 100% guaranteed. So you should read some value to life answers in the 2AC. But if you just like pulled out your security K 2AC or your Gaumbin K 2AC and you like didn't read their cards, like you're not going to answer that. And then the block is going to say you dropped a VTL DA. And like VTL DA, that's just never something you want to hear dropped. Insurance case arguments, counterplan checks, K tricks. There was something else that I wanted to say to you. Like multiple links to stuff, which I guess kind of falls under DAs as well as
K's too.
Ks. Yeah, that's just kind of like a universal one.
A lot of people, like in a K2AC, will only answer the first link they hear, so they'll only answer the security link, and they'll forget to kind of maybe answer the terror top link or whatever. You know what I mean? You have to be very careful about distinguishing links, because those can kind of a lot of times blow up into entirely new different K arguments.
Okay, and the last point, something that you always need to look for is badness, and I know that's not like a real word.
Pretty egregious.
But it's important, and I was telling back to think of to write it, so not an English major. Is that your partner, this is something you can use them for, is you should be reading a lot of the NegZab during the 1NC while you're prepping, but your partner certainly should be reading whenever you're not, or since it's paperless, you both should probably be reading it, so it's advantage of paperless. And that person, your partner then, is cross-sexing the 1N about stuff, and inevitably the cross-sex is going to reveal a bunch of stuff about their strategy. And by that, I don't just mean like your partner points out something you didn't have a chance to look at because you didn't get to read their politics DA. All the time, I'd find out from my partner how shitty their politics DA was because of the cross-sex and not because of me having read their cards. And that's something that should make it into your speech. There's nothing worse than hearing an amazing 1A just like destroy the 1NC in the cross-sex, and then the 2AC just is like, I'm ready to go, gets up, gives the speech. None of that ever makes it into the speech. Maybe it makes it into the 1AR, but like some judges are not going to be okay with that because it was in the cross-sex and it never translated into a constructive.
A little tip that I like to use when I debate is I have my 1A just like take a sheet of paper and just kind of, he'll put the header DA and then he'll just write as indicts. And so if I don't have time to prep that, I'll just take his sheet up, and then right next to me as I'm giving the 2AC, I'm constantly looking back and I'm just incorporating what he discovered in the cross-sex into my speech. It's kind of like an efficient way to do that for prep time.
Yeah, and the other thing you can discover from the cross-sex is kind of just like clues, and by that I mean like they're going to give away either something that the 2N has no interest in going for, or something that the 1N doesn't understand at all. Like if the 1A is asking questions of the 1N about their counterplan, and the 1N's like, partner, you want to take this one? Like either that's like going to be only possible in the 2NC, or it's something that like, you know, a lot of teams, they read the K just to throw it in the 1NC and they have no intention of going for it. If the 2N, or if one of the partners is the only partner that can talk about it coherently and like they kind of just like walk around all your questions in the cross-sex, like, ooh, I wouldn't be too worried about them going for the K. There are exceptions, like people may try to like slow play their hand, but if you can make them look like an idiot about what they know about their K and the cross-sex, it's probably not going to be a huge feature of the 2NR, if maybe the block, but. So just always be looking for clues based on how they answer questions. And also, if they get really freaked out when you ask them a certain question in the 1NC cross-sex, that should give you a clue about their strategy. Like if you've exploited some huge flaw in one of their off-case positions in the cross-sex and pointed it out, and they're like super like, oh, well, you know, maybe that's a net benefit, you know, not as of the 1NC. Like, if there's stuff like that, you should be like, no, is politics a net benefit? And they're like, we didn't read a card on that. And the 1NC be like, can it be a net benefit in the block? If they're like, you know, we're not going to commit to that. And you can be like, well, we're not going to commit to answering it, the 2AC. You know, like, you should obviously not drop it, is what I meant by that. But I meant more like, you know, you should have a point in the 2AC where you were like, their failure to commit to what is actually a net benefit to this counterplan in the 2AC justifies all new 1AR answers if it becomes so in the block. Just like, you know, something, you should always throw just a, this justifies something in the 1AR inevitably in the 2AC.
So the point about clues ties well into the second point, and I guess we're going to go all the way around.
We can just start deleting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We're going to delete eventually.
Deleting, I mean erasing.
Number 2. Decide time allocation. You should be thinking about every possible 2NR and what is credible. So think about, literally think, you know, so the 1NC is, you know, the EXO counterplan with politics as a net benefit, a critique, topicality, the China relations DA, and then like case. But let's say they only get to a minute of case. Which of those off-case positions would you completely just, you know, you would spend 30 seconds on? What? I said China, but China. Why would you spend very little time on China if that was the one?
Maybe more than 30 seconds.
If you're fast, 30 seconds, and you're in high school, maybe like 45 minutes.
It's not viable for you to go for this. I mean,
why?
Because it's like unlikely that they'll case.
Exactly. So a case is really undercovered in the 1NC, and there's like an off-case position that's not a net benefit to a counterplan. What, are you like on YouTube or something?
No.
Okay. And there's like there's not a counterplan that solves all the case and cases undercovered. You need to assess the risk of that off-case position and adjust your 2AC accordingly.
Can I make one caveat to that? Know your judges and also know the team you're debating. And there are some teams where they slow play their strat in the 1NC, and they're not going to make a bunch of case arguments, and it's going to be like the whole 2. Like there was a really, really good college team last year that would only make like 3 or 4, they would make one impactee argument for every single one of your impacts in the 1NC, and then they would read like 7 more cards on it in the block for every single one of them. And like if you didn't answer that, if you blew off the case in the 2AC, like you would lose because that would be the block. The block would be a DA case. So when Ryan's saying like, you know, if they undercover the case, it's no longer credible for them to go for the status quo in the DA, recognize what credible means. If they're 1NC on your huge hedge advantage, which has like 6 different scenarios for different regional wars, and they're just like no impact to hedge, no challengers, and alt causes to hedge, and they go on, like you're going to be in a pretty good spot because like if they read a ton more cards, you get leeway on like a bunch of different arguments. But let's say they have one answer to each of your scenarios and a couple solvency cards, I would be a little more concerned about blowing off the DA. And also know the strength of the DA.
Right.
This goes back to knowledge. If you know that the China DA is like the best DA against your app, if they drop the case in the 1NC, I would still spend a long time with the China DA. Because like, they're going to win a link, they're going to probably win a huge impact. You have to win that your case outweighs, so it's still going to be a big threat.
Yes,
I always had problems like knowing where to read cards in 2AC on case.
If your 1AC doesn't answer it, you read a card. If your
Yeah.
1AC answers it, you don't read a card. But
Or
that's
if you're,
stupid.
yeah, I would not. The only things you need to read cards on the 2AC
I
are,
usually didn't though, but then the blocking
I don't-
just kind of become.
I think, okay, so like,
That's 1AC design.
we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So like,
Yeah.
can you just like remember to remind us and say that on the case?
Yeah.
But there is like a strat for that. Did someone else have their hand up and I just like ignored you?
Okay.
Okay, I thought you did. Yeah, so deciding time allocation, a sub-component of that is having a strategy on every single page. So, like Ryan said, if you've predicted every 2 an hour, as a consequence of that, you can also predict what your strategy, you should have a strategy for every single one of those 2 an hours after the 2AC. So like, I don't really think you should basically ever give a stand-up 2AC unless you were done prepping and read a majority of their evidence during the 1NC, so that all you did during the 3-minute cross-ex was write out or think to yourself what your strat was on every page. And again, this might have been stuff that I mean, there are exceptions to this. Like, a lot of people have already thought this through for almost every strategy during their preseason or during the times when they wrote all of these blocks. And if you know that you have a coherent strategy for every 2 an hour on all of your blocks, go for it and you're probably fine. Talk to your partner about what indicts they got in the cross-ex and then you can go for it. But if you don't have a block to something, which happens more often than not, I think, you should probably take that time to think through what you're going to say in the 2AR. What do I need to win this debate? Is it all in the 2AC? And the rest of it's just like extra. I'm not saying like only make 2 arguments on stuff in the 2AC. I'm saying like make sure that you have a strategy. Does that make sense?
So within that strategy, it's like the most important thing on each page. It's like a classic Scott Geffridge quote.
Most people whisper it, but no one will say it out loud.
Come on.
Offense.
What's the third one? Offense. Offense. You should be generating as much offense as possible on every 2AC page, which is crucial.
Let's say you don't have a block. What do people do? What do any of you do? Did any of you debate a new dissad last year that you didn't have any answers to? All right, what did you do when they were a new dissad?
I mean, it wasn't a very good one. But
What'd you do?
Impact turned it.
Okay, impact turns. That's a source of offense. What did you do?
Impact turning was not an option for us to the Bulgaria relations disadvantage.
Just kidding.
So research gap.
Okay, so what did you do?
We went for questions on the link and case outweighs their impacts, and
Okay.
questions on whether or not the U.S. and Bulgaria were really that important.
So yeah, I mean like on really dumb, squirrely DAs,
Okay, yeah, if they're
probably
dating
you're gonna go for
stupid,
deep.
yeah, okay, but let's pretend that they had and this has happened before. Like, you think you know everything about your app, and then they have some sweet generic topic DA that's not really related to your app, but their link card is so good, it's like inescapable. What are some things that you can do? But let's say this DA is real good, and their impact is like terrorism. What would be useful here?
Add-on.
Right, okay. The most important component of any 2AC is add-ons. Has anyone here given a 2AC where they have not read an add-on? It should be like all of you. I'm sure all of you have given a 2AC where you haven't read an add-on.
Yeah.
Oh, A should be here, yeah.
I used to give 2AC with no add-ons. Now you have to have like 7. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to have an add-on. When you're writing, and this goes back to like original research, when you're writing your app, one of the primary things that you need is you need to have a big advantage or a big solvency mechanism that gets to every impact in debate. Every impact you can think of in debate. Like, I would make a list of your team and then be like, how does our app get to every single one of these? It might be like, you know, you have kind of a small app, but you have a big advantage, so it's primarily your advantage impact that gets to those things. Or you might have a big app that just solves everything. Like, an example of the first one is like, a lot of people used to read WTO trade apps, and so they would just have a card on trade solves every impact in debate. Or, as a flip side of that, you can just have an app that you somehow say solves relations with every country, which gets to a bunch of different regional impacts. So, just make sure you have add-ons that get to as many impacts as possible. So when you run into a situation where you don't have anything to say to a dissad,
Bulgaria.
you still have something to say. But what was the terminal impact of Bulgaria?
I don't even remember.
It was probably Balkans War.
Balkans War.
Oh, that was a 2NC add-on.
Oh,
Okay. You've got an add-on that gets to that. It probably, and then you can just, the rest of your 2AC can be like, obviously U.S.-Bulgaria relations are not the linchpin of Balkan stability. You're going to be in a much better position than if you only have analytic link defense.
Yeah,
Right?
like imagine how much better your 2AR is when you solve the terminal impact to their stupid DA and their DA is stupid.
And you have another part of your case.
Exactly.
Okay, so add-ons and other things that you can do against a DA are obviously maybe not as offense. You should obviously, if you have the option to impact turn, you should impact turn. If you're comfortable with that, obviously, don't impact turn something with like a back file that's unhighlighted that you're like just reading for the sake of reading it, because I think you're probably gonna lose. Unless you're just like really good at that kind of stuff.
But if you're going to impact turn, you better be prepared because the debate gets big and it's not about the internal or exterior.
Impact turns, what else? What's something else that you could do? Let's say they read politics DA you had no uniqueness for. They had an impact that you're like, you've really never heard this impact before. It's like new to debate. Okay? And their link, it's not a normal politics DA. Their link's not political capital. Their link's about one specific senator. What would you do? Theory?
All in on intrinsicness.
We have to.
Okay, I mean,
I don't know if that fits within the rubric of offense.
theory is kind of offense, but it is, but it's like, I probably, I mean, I'll put it on here, theory is offense. I would say that's like a kind
That's
of,
like really last resort though.
what's the, yeah, I was gonna say, what's the like thing for it's like suicide mission? What's the like Japanese word for that? That's the kamikaze move. Especially in the 2AC, if you're just like politics, intrinsicness, moving on. Okay, how about like
Go to
link
the chest
turns?
and you like.
How about link turns?
Yeah.
Like, okay, inevitably, and I mean there are probably some exceptions to this, but inevitably some component of their disad will interact with a link turn you have pre-written for another disad. An example of this is, let's say that they read a disad about agency rollback of your plan, and maybe you don't have any cards that talk about how NASA feels about your plan, but the warrant in their evidence for why NASA doesn't like your plan is because of how much money it costs. You should read their card and then read all of your link turns to the spending DA about how your plan solves money to try to link turn the warrant in their evidence. Now, if they're a good dev team, they're going to have other links to this disad, and you're going to maybe be a little bit in trouble in the what they are. But you know, that's your partner's problem. Just kidding. But that's something that you'll then have to read their evidence and work with that. But
Joke stuff.
I know, I'm so funny.
I know. Those are big jokes.
But at least in the short term, you can at least answer their DA and not come off like you just have gotten nothing in the 2AC. So obviously when you debate something new, defense, indict their evidence, all of that's great, but always be looking for a source of offense. Does anyone have any like situations where they think they don't really understand what they would do based on this method? It's kind of situational dependent, but
You know, defense is important too. Like, we're going to talk, I guess, if we have time about specific arguments, but like, impact D is so crucial in every 2AC. But, you know, try to look for as much offense as possible. Yeah.
What do you think the most strategic offense is? In the series?
Well, we kind of, at Northwestern, do kind of, Repco basically, I think, gave a lecture on this today. We do kind of like, we don't really, yeah, like the civic engagement DA is kind of basically the stock Northwestern answer. But that's a whole other lecture, I think.
I mean, the offense to a K is like impact turning or link turning.
Right.
It's the same in the
Impact
DA.
turn the alt.
Either you, I mean, link turning is rough if you don't read kind of a lefty kind of app, but I wouldn't recommend it. But if you read the weaponized space app, you should probably be impact turning the K. Like, I'd say if you're not, there's something seriously wrong there.
Right. So we've already talked about 4 add-ons to get to every impact.
Okay. So let's start erasing this. It's getting really far away, and I'm sure more time to get there. Okay, number 5 is we a little bit talked about before, but I think it's worth its own point. Is using your partner, and this goes not just as far as the prep for the 2AC, and so the ways that we use them are cross-ex, pre-round, but also, you know, 1AR cards. This is like technically a caveat from or is separate from the 2AC lecture, but something worth noting to 2As is like, in high school it seems like people don't really utilize the ability to have your partner read cards in the 1AR nearly as much as they should. And there are times where you can, like, if you're applicants at politics DA and it's a large portion of the block, I really don't think you can win if no new cards are introduced after the 2AC. I would be shocked if the applicant won, assuming that the neg didn't drop anything or mess anything up somewhere else. Like, I would be very, very surprised if the app was able to come back on a dis like politics without new cards. There are exceptions to everything we're saying, but for the most part, that's true.
That's something too to keep in mind when you're getting really time crunched in the 2AC. Like if you get to a disad with like 30 seconds left, and it's an okay disad, you need to just like, you should try to read cards if possible, but just rapid fire analytics that the 1AR can read cards on. Just so it's justifiable that they can read cards if you have the analytic in the 2AC. Oh, we have that on the list. Okay, well, that'll be a lot of
Sorry, we're very organized. Okay, so the last point that I have here is 2AR prep, which again is kind of different from the 2AC, but I think it's important because I kind of view the speeches as like just two really spread out, one long speech. 2AR prep, I would always give the 1A something that was either prep intensive or required reading all of their cards to do. So the 2A kind of has read all of the, well, we'll talk more about this later about why I think the 2A should have read all the cards in the debate, but the evidence comparison or something like, I sometimes gave my partner impact help because I knew that that would normally take me just 3 minutes by myself to do, but I only had 4 minutes of prep, and so I would just have him do it and then I could do the rest of the stuff. Or things that don't require in-depth knowledge of the intricacies of the app. And what I mean by that is your partner should obviously know about the app, but you're just inevitably going to know more about it than they do because you've done all the research and they haven't. And so something that's not smart to give the 1A to prep is like your main solvency deficit to a counterplan, or like this intricate firm theory argument that requires knowing all of the different current mandates of the NASA program that you affect. Stuff like that, probably you should prep it yourself. Stuff that's okay to give to them, impact help, comparing EV, politics, uniqueness, just
especially think about what they're good at too. Like if your partner cut the politics file when you're neg, give them the uniqueness debate because they'll be super sweet on it,
Yeah.
That's kind of what I was
important note for this is make sure that you and your partner have a rapport where you can use one another's language. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're the really, really persuasive and slower one, although if you're the 2A, I think that's kind of weird. And then your partner's the really fast technical one. They need to be able to write in your voice when they're writing something for you for the 2AR, because otherwise you're going to sound like an idiot. Since it's paperless, they're probably either going to be typing something up for you that you can just keep on your computer, but so it's not as egregious as people who directly are here, partner, here's my computer, read the rest of your 2AR. But you still need to be able to write it so that it doesn't sound like a totally disjointed part of their speech. So, however if that requires maybe a bunch of practice debates with them, but more importantly, I think it just requires debating with someone and knowing how they debate so that you can figure it out.
The last little thing about 2AR prep is it's really hard for me to prep for the 2AR when the 1AR constantly thinks of something and then tells you it. He's like, oh, by the way, this is a good idea, or something like that, because it kind of gets me off. So I always the first 30 seconds of the 2AR prep, assuming I have, substantial, I'm like, okay, tell me everything that you think is important. And then he'll spend, 30 seconds and then we're done. We don't talk again. Because otherwise it kind of throws me off if he thinks of something and tells me, I'm just shut up, I'm, trying to concentrate.
Okay, but similar to that, the other thing is do make sure that you at some point talk to your partner. And that can be either during the 2R prep because it's clear what they're going for, if it's a one-off debate, or they can't go for politics because they dropped intrinsicness, so they have to go for the K, stuff like that. You can talk before the 2R, but and that's not the case, and the 2R just went and they had some trick, and this happens basically more often than not, where the 2R will get up and at some point they're going to be like, the 1AR totally dropped that the plan gets rolled back. You are screwed. And then you're sitting there as a 2A and you're like, how are we going to recover from this? And then you wait till the speech is over and you turn to your partner and you're like, well, first of all, did you drop this? Or did I just miss it on the flow and is he or she lying? That's the first question you should ask. Yeah. Second question is you and your partner should both be looking for places elsewhere on your flow or other flows where a warrant or argument was made in the 1AR that could clearly be applied to this. Because judges don't want to vote on stupid arguments just because they were dropped. They'll only do so if they were dropped and there's just no way out. If there's a way out, you should find it and you should use your partner to help you find it. Because just inevitable. Like people suck at flowing, especially with paperless. So you're gonna probably miss a couple arguments that your partner made. This is the crucial time to be like, help me out here. What did you say that I can use to get us out of this hole? And then second to that is, let's say you didn't drop something. It's just important to talk to your 1A, I think. In almost every situation, there are some where you've got it, you don't really need their help, but I think as a general principle, like policy debate is a team activity. There's a reason why you have a partner there with you, especially when you're AF, and you turn to that person and you say, all right, I'm thinking after that 2 hour that our best shot is the solvency deficit and our warming advantage outweighs the DA. What do you think? And they'll either be like, yeah, that sounds good, what do you want me to do? Or they'll be like, are you kidding me? Like, this counterplan solves the whole case, I wrote the neg. We can't win. And then you gotta be like, well, we're going for 100% defense, or we're just gonna straight turn politics in the 2AR. You know? So like talking to them, crucial. I would not recommend, even if you have bad relations with your partner maybe outside of debate, I would try to keep it civil in debates, because it's really, really important to have a rapport with your partner and be successful on either side. You guys are laughing, do you like hate each other or something?
No.
We have a partnership that's also out of
Oh, cute.
it is so cute.
I like how we offered that before you asked
You're
anything.
debating with your girlfriend?
I don't have a girlfriend. I have my boyfriend though.
All right.
Complete, yeah.
Classic. Okay.
Well,
She's not married. There was one of those in college.
Like,
Alright.
like, you know,
So funny.
Alright.
Oh my god.
Refocusing. Know when to move on.
Something we obviously don't know how to do with this.
I know. And we're on 6.
wait, Ryan, don't you play with your boyfriend?
Lane Kershaw?
Yeah.
Know when to move on in the 2AC. This is kind of what I was alluding to earlier about when you need to just start rapid firing analytics because you look at the timer.
Let's make a caveat to this so we don't just study a bunch of practice space. We're all just like, no. So you have to read a card for some arguments. If you don't read it, you didn't make it. But there is some stuff where, and there was a very successful college team a few years ago, this Harvard team that did this a lot because the 2A was like kind of funny and slow, and the 1A was just like the most technically proficient debater that like ever lived. And so the way that they dealt with this is like the 2AC on politics would be like one uniqueness card, and then he would just kind of list off like 5 other reasons why the bill wasn't going to pass. But he wasn't just like, SCIFTA's not going to pass, and he moved on. He was like, SCIFTA's not going to pass. A, Baucus is blocking it because of beef negotiations. B, like there are conservative Democrats that will never vote for it. Like C, labor unions are opposed and it's coming up before an election. And then he'd go on, and then the 1AR would read 2 cards on each of those. And so the thing that's, that's like high risk, high reward, but that wasn't just like he made a really blippy analytic and he went on. It was like he made the argument and gave the warrant in the card, and then the 1AR read the card. This is not something you should do every 2AC, and this is by no means something that you should make a habit. Yeah. But if you have to do it, it's okay if you've made the argument sufficiently. If it's a well-developed argument just without a card, that's fine. They can always read it. At least they can predict it and answer it in the block. But if you're just like, SCIFT is not going to pass, no cards, and then the 1AR gets up and read like 10 cards, you're not going to get away with that.
Judges are not going to like it either.
So analytic to card, kind of 1AR disparity, or 1AR shift. And then the other thing about knowing when to move on is there are some times where you're going to be like, I spent 3 weeks writing answers to this dissat, and I have the sickest 2AC to it ever. It's just like unanswerable. And then they read 8 off, and you get to that dissat in the 2AC, and you're like, no, I'm reading all 9 of these cards. Like, these cards are sweet. And then you look at the timer, and you have a minute left, and you have 4 dissats, and then you're screwed. Because they're not going to go for that dissat. They're going to go for, like, the 3 you dropped. So instead, you need to, like, and I think this is maybe even a 2AC prep thing. If I know that I have too many good cards for something, I'm going to circle, well, this was on paper, so I'm going to not put in the document the cards that I think are really good but maybe not necessary, and put them in a separate 1AR document so that my partner can read them if they're contested.
Yeah.
Pick and choose. And I think that even maybe, as a general, this is a block writing thing. If you're not very fast, or if you tend to do that thing where you get really excited about something and you overcover it, don't make your blocks long. Like I would put like maybe like 6 or 7 answers on something and never put more than that. Because with paperless especially, it'll be really easy to like call up new cards, I think. Right? I don't know how to do paperless. Isn't it like relatively easy to call up a new card if you need it, if you know where it is? but putting it in the block only creates a risk that you're going to read it if you are that type of person. If you're not that type of person and you're very, very fast, you should put all your cards in there because you'll probably read a bunch of them. So just no time allocation.
It's also a good reason, if you're that person, to put the best arguments at the top. It's kind of like the classic block writing. You don't want to not get to the really important solvency deficit or whatever.
Sure.
You want to 7?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I love this one. This one's good.
Okay. Can I erase this?
Oh,
you can
yeah.
erase those. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Number 7 is psychological warfare, and that's like being able to read the other team. We talked about this a little bit. I guess I erased it already. When we talked about like reading the wiki and kind of doing on the ground intel, but that is not just that. It's, let's say there's a team that you debate at every tournament, or there's a team that you've been debating since you were like a sophomore in high school, or there's a team that like they're your biggest competitor, or there's a team that's from your region and you have to deal with them at regional tournaments and national tournaments, and you just like, all you do is debate them all the time.
So if you have a steering wheel.
Okay, so you need to know what they do. And like, I don't just mean like, do they like to go for politics? I mean like, if you debate someone 10 times in 1 year, you know exactly what card they read when they read econ defense. So maybe you want to put an econ impact in your 1AC because you already have 3 cards to answer the Bennett and Nordstrom card they're going to read in the 1MC. So like, predict and know what they're going to do. And that's not something you should like, I'm not saying like, don't finish updating your app. Just go and look and ask everyone who's ever debated your biggest rival what they said and what they did exactly for 2 hours. What I'm saying is, every time you debate someone, you should keep a document, or like if you flow on the computer, which I don't think you should with paperless, but I don't really know how paperless works again, so ignore what I'm saying about that. Just make sure that you have some notation somewhere where you're like, here are my notes on this person. And you'll notice a trend. Before every tournament, you should or at least before you debate a team that you debated before, you should open up that document and be like, what did I notice about what they did last time? Last time they were really, really case intensive in the 2NR, even though they also went for a counter plan. Last time they were really, really bad at answering add-ons, and they only read impact defense to answer them. Or last time, when they went for the K, they did this weird thing where they tried to hide new links on the perm. Stuff like that is like crucial to being able to effectively to deal with people who are really, really good but very predictable. And everyone is predictable. Like, you may think you're not predictable, but you're predictable. Like, people that have debated you a lot will know your same kind of little things to do. And I mean, I know I was very, very predictable. So like, you have to be able to, I'm not saying you should change yourself from being predictable, but I'm saying you should exploit that in other people.
A good corollary to that is to listen to what the judges tell your opponents after debate rounds. Like, we had a debate this year where we kind of scared the other team into going for a counter plan that we didn't think was competitive. And after the debate, they asked the judge, it wasn't in the 2NR, they were like, what do you think? Do you think this could be competitive? The judge was like, yeah, I can kind of see it. And I wrote that down, and the next debate we debated them, they went for that counter plan. And I had known that because the judge had kind of given them a bone on that it was competitive the last time we debated them. So listen to judge feedback, listen to the way that they're going to change themselves next time. They're going to answer your add-on differently. They're going to have better arguments on competition and kind of anticipate that the next time you debate.
Honestly, that judge one is really important. Especially, there are certain judges, I know this in college and I know this is true in high school, that everyone like thinks are awesome. And so if you're debating in front of that judge and that judge says something about the way something was deployed, you should write that down and like email it to yourself or something, because you're going to have that judge again, and maybe you're going to debate someone else who deploys that argument in front of you, and you need to know how to deal with it. Or that judge coaches a team that you're going to debate, and it's likely that that strategy is going to appear the next time you debate his or her team. Or that debater who that judge is giving advice to is definitely going to take that advice because they think that judge is sweet. Okay, so all of those things should be like kind of clues to you. Other thing about psychological warfare, separate from like individuals and kind of specific arguments, is just knowing when to, I'm very hesitant to say blow something off because I don't think you should ever do that, but knowing when it's okay to undercover. And what I mean by that is, if there's a team who just cannot explain the K to save their lives, just like, I went to GBN, so you can see where I'm coming from this. Like, there are just going to be people who like don't have a great critique background, or just have never gone for, or on the flip side have never gone for politics in their lives. It's probably going to show up in their 1NC, especially at the TOC or like a really important tournament where people just want to pressure you because maybe you're reading a new app. You need to be able to be like, all right, so, I mean, this is GBN. It's unlikely they're going to go for the K. It's probably okay if I only have like my 5 best arguments in the 2AC. I have enough, and the caveat to this is you're still following the earlier rule that we deleted or erased, which said that, I don't know what is happening to me today. We still have the earlier rule, which is that you still have to have a strategy on every page. So your 2AC shouldn't just be like, one in-tax or perm, screw you, I'm going on, you can't go for the K. Because like they might just have read all their blocks, someone else wrote them, and you'd be kind of in trouble. But what I do mean to that is knowing strategically how to be like, here are my 5 best answers. If you go for this in the block, maybe the 1AR will have to read some new cards, but I've got enough here to win this debate because I don't think you can effectively deploy this. But you don't undercover it to the point of impossible to win if they actually did go for it and somehow miraculously got better at the K overnight. Does everyone understand the like distinction between those 2 scenarios? Don't drop it. Don't vastly undercover it. Do just enough to get it done if you had to. And usually know yourself well enough to know what those 5 arguments are or whatever, if for every major threat, I guess. So like every genre of debate argument. The only thing I would say that should not be the case for is like, if they have some new argument that you think is really, really stupid, I would still probably spend some time there being like, here are all the 6 reasons why it's stupid, because you never know if they waited and made it, like, there are some teams in college who purposely read 2-month-old uniqueness for their DAs in the 1NC, so that the 2AC will be like, this DA obviously sucks, you don't have any uniqueness, whatever, and then they're like, oh, we actually have 20 cards from today. Like, they do that on purpose. They sandbag because they want you to purposely undercover it. So that's a scenario where I would not undercover it just because their uniqueness card sucked. I would still make all my normal answers and be like, if they're going to read new uniqueness, the 1AR gets to read new cards because, you know, you're cheating. Whatever. Not cheating, but you're being
Sly.
You're being very sly. Are there any questions about those scenarios and kind of when to use those predictions?
Okay. So psychological warfare. A little quick kind of interesting note. People should be really universal in the way you cite your cards. Because like you can kind of understand who cuts the cards if the formatting is different on different sites. So like you know your opponent really well. Like Steph knows the way that, you know, her kind of person she debated all the time cut his cards. And so she could like know if that was in the 1NC, you know, maybe it's likely that that's the 2NR. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, I would universalize. I think most teams have universalized their formatting on teams, but you would be surprised at how even when people universalize their formatting, they write tags certain ways, or they use certain notations. Like there's this one kid on our team who we had to break him of the habit, but he like kept insisting on using jargon and or like debate like notations. So he'd be like CPKTS in like his tag. We'd be like, all right, everyone's gonna know you wrote that, you cut that card. Change that. Okay, so just make sure that you're universalizing it so people can't do this to you. Because if you notice that your big opponents, like when you're neg against them and the 2A always reads like half of their cards in one format and half of them in the other, and then they only are going for the cards that are cut in one format, it's likely they're only going for the cards that they cut, and the rest of them are other people on their team, they're just not going for that. There are obviously exceptions to this. Don't drop stuff just because you don't think they cut it. You don't want to risk that. Because people might, be like 2 steps ahead of you and they're purposely changing their formatting to make you think they cut it when they didn't. But like, if someone's really into psychological warfare, but just that's something to keep in mind.
Okay, so 8, embedded clash on case. Case is kind of the part in the 2AC where people get really inefficient and really bogged down. If you spend if you spend 4 minutes of the 2AC, they say Indo-Pac doesn't cause extinction. If you keep referring back to the 1NC 12 arguments they put on case, you're not going to cover the rest of the off-case positions because you're going to get very bogged down. So everyone knows what embedded clash is? Yeah, okay, so you should be using the language of the 1NC to answer their arguments without ever saying they say. That should not happen in the 2AC. If you're saying they say in the 2AC, you're being inefficient. You know, when I do the case in the 2AC, I like to kind of do a very quick sentence, no more than a sentence, just like kind of extending the impact of the advantage. Maybe there's like an impact that they forgot to read impact defense on. So like they didn't read Indo-Pac War defense. So I, you know, at the top of the case in the 2AC, I'd be like, you know, extend the this is not going to make sense, but extend the asteroid's advantage. Didn't answer Indo-Pac, causes extinction, cast time frame outweighs the DA, and then I would answer the 1 in C number 1 without referring to it. Okay? So embedded clash on case, be efficient there. That's like really the most important. Sam asked the question earlier, when do you read a card on case? I like to use the rule of thumb, and you know, maybe there's some exceptions that if your 1AC answers the argument, you should not read a card. Presumably your 1AC is designed to answer all of the kind of case cheat shots, you know.
Usually it does, but then the problem comes in the 2NC when it's like 8 minutes of case. And then it's like, well,
yeah, I mean, like that might be the exception. If they spend 8 minutes of case, you probably want to read additional cards.
Yeah, no, but I'm just saying I never know exactly
like where.
Yeah.
It's just like where your 1AC cards are the weakest.
Okay, what I would think of it this way: what arguments, if they were in the 2NR and all you could hand them were the cards that you've already read, would you lose the debate if it was just card to beat card?
Yeah.
So like if they're like reading Impact D and you have to read a new card, you probably need to change the impact that's in your 1AC. But like if they read like 3 sweet cards about how your solvency mechanism sucks and they're like from last week, like you need to read as many solvency cards as you can.
Yeah.
Because if that's in the 2NR as of now, you lose, right? Does anyone have any questions about that? Does anyone not know what embedded clash is? Do we want to like go over that really quickly?
No, you're all on top of it. Harrison, what's embedded clash?
Not being inefficient, saying they say to prove your other opponent's arguments wrong.
Okay. Sophomores, look out for him. He's good. All right. Yeah. It's pretty self-explanatory. What's 9 step?
Diversify.
Okay. Diversify. Every argument should be different in the 2AC. You should never make the same argument twice. As many warrants, as many arguments as possible. You're reading uniqueness against skip-dab. You read 3 different warrants that are like, you know, contained arguments. You know, Obama doesn't have political capital because of Libya and the debt ceiling. Skip is not going to pass because of trade promotion authority and Baucus. Diversify every warrant and every card that you read, and just never, ever repeat yourself or make the same argument twice. Never read 2 cards in 1 issue.
Obviously, if you're reading multiple uniqueness cards on a disad, that's fine, and you might categorize those normally as the same argument, but if they have different warrants in the cards, that's not what we're talking about. That's not repetitive. That's like just being strategic.
Exactly.
Similarly, I think something that helps with this is there are 2 methods to the 2AC. There's the really, really organized kind of like formulaic. Neither of these is the right way. There's just like based 100% on you and how you debate. The first type of 2AC is the type of 2AC where it's very, very organized and everything is grouped together by theme. So you get to a disad, you make all of your uniqueness arguments, then you make all your link arguments, and then you make all your impact arguments. That's fine. It creates a coherent structure. The 1AR can directly group stuff, and it's very, very easy for the 1AR to extend things. The second type of, and that's more for someone who's maybe not as fast, but more just like very, very organized and efficient. I think that's the kind of 2AC you should be giving. The flip side of that is the 2AC, which is kind of just like go as fast as you can and scatter it to really throw them off. If your 1A is good enough where they don't need a 2AC structure to create structure for their 1AR, this is the kind of 2AC you should give. If you're fast and you're technical and you can just like go non-unique, link turn, impact turn, another non-unique, a theory argument, another non-unique, just like stuff that it's not all organized together, you can do that. But only if your 1AR is going to be able to create some semblance of an order out of that chaos. Does that make sense? If you've got a partner who's also kind of like thematic and like maybe like not as fast or likes having a preset order from your 2AC that they can just go directly off of, not the best kind of 2AC for you to be giving. And the reason why each of those is strategic is, like I said, the first one makes it so that your 1AR is very, very clean. It gives a clear order of the way things are progressing. It illustrates where they are weakest on your offense, and then it just kind of creates this beautiful picture for the 2AR. The flip side of that is the kind of chaotic, out of like going everywhere in every direction 2AC is that it keeps them on their toes. They don't know what you actually want to go for. If just imagine like this, if you've got 4 uniqueness cards in a row, your 2 link turns in a row, and your 1 impact defense in a row, like the app clearly is going for some sort of uniqueness argument and maybe a link turn on this ad just because that's where they've got the most cards. It's kind of like not showing your hand, but they can very clearly see where you have the most and where they are going to have to spend the most time. But if you've got one of your uniqueness cards, it's like the first 2 AC argument, and your second and third one are like 15 and 16, if you read that many cards on politics, that's going to be more difficult for them to answer. And also, it's really annoying when you're given a block on a DA, and like you have to answer the uniqueness at the top, and then you come to like the 2 AC argument, and it's another uniqueness card, and you have to be like, I already answered that, and like the third card I read on uniqueness like 3 minutes ago. It's just like, it's very annoying for the block. So you create problems for them both ways, and I think that they're just different problems that you should resolve based on your partnership.
Okay, so 10 is theory. You should always have multiple theory arguments in the 2AC. The reason why is the 2AC is really hard. And the negative is a block. And the more that you can do to dictate the terms of the block and make them have to spend time doing things like answering conditionality, international fiat, intrinsicness, fiat solves the link, the more time you can make them kind of have to spend, that's a great payoff for the 2AC, right? And that theory argument, you should always extend one theory argument, like the best one in the 1AR. Because there's also a great payoff in the 2NR for theory arguments. So, that's pretty straightforward. Always in the 2AC, always mess with the block as much as you possibly can, because when you're AF, that's basically the way you win, right? Corollary is something to think about. If you go for theory in a big AF debate in like the ELAMs, you kind of get a reputation as a team that's willing to go for that, that payoff can only increase. So, I'm not saying you should go for conditionality, if you like need a last resort, it's kind something, it's just something to consider. Like, we did that in like the first ELAM of the year, for conditionality, and honestly, I think that's kind of lame. I like kind of, have a little like, weirdness, like guilt about that. But what that meant is that the rest of the year, if conditionality was in the 1AR, it was, at least like 1:32 minutes of the 2NR. And that's a huge payoff when you're in debating a big, fast college team. So that's just something to consider. You should be making theory, I'm not saying that you should spend, make like 7 theory arguments in the 2AC and sound really kind of lame if you just like read a waterfall of, PICS bad, conditionality bad, international fiat bad. But you should like pick the most credible ones, and you guys kind of know what those are, and those should always be in the 2AC. That includes theory arguments on disads. Like, those are kind of silly, and nobody really wants to vote for them. But it is something that the 1NR has to spend time answering, and it's always annoying when they have to kind of pull up their intrinsicness block, and it can kind of sap time away from the block. So, any questions about that? All right. You got to 14? Nice.
Okay, so the next one is making sure that it seems like this is random, but all these things are important. The next one is the order in which you give your 2AC, and I think this is something that like I've noticed in some of these practice debates are like not something that has a lot of coherence to me. And there are a couple exceptions to this, basically as with everything else. And what number is this again? 11. Okay. So what do you guys think should be the first thing in your 2AC? Let's say that 1NC is T, China Dissed, Spending Dissed, Ground Counter Plan, Asteroids K, case. What's first in your order?
I think that solves your case first, right?
Well, there's
That's not anything about.
Okay.
I would say T if you're like clear when you start off, but if not, case, and then.
Love that.
Okay, so number 1 is just like always, always, always things that you lose if you drop. You lose if dropped. Okay, that's, the little time of patient burdens, stock issues, and topicality. So T, case. Now, he just brought up, what's your name? David just brought up an important point, which is that most people in high school just assume that topicality has to come first just because, it's topicality. But the truth is, and this is what I always did, I always put the case first, because if you're really fast or they're very unclear or hard for people to flow, starting with the case is a lot easier for them to get used to your voice before you go to something like T, where it's going to be really complex, high-tech, like theoretical arguments that are all given really fast and hard to flow. Like, just in general, I think almost every 2AC on T is incomprehensible because usually the judge has no idea what you're talking about and they don't have the cards in front of them, so it's just like a slew of like really clipped analytics. And the way to remedy that to some extent is if you start with case, maybe they don't get like the first like 5 seconds of your 2AC totally written down, but like they'll have enough of it and they'll get used to your voice. It helps if maybe you read a card on the case, so like they can get used to your reading voice before you then go to T and read cards. Like I found this like very, very effective when I switched in my senior year of high school to doing case first, because we read an app that was probably not T, and like T was really important. So just making sure that your 2AC on T is like good to go. But even if your app is T, I just think case coming first helps if you're really fast. They can get used to your voice. Okay, and then after that, something that she said, I don't know your name either. Isabel? Something that Isabel said, which is that putting things kind of in the order of most threatening to least threatening. 2 is just like most.
And the most threatening is kind of what she said, is things that can solve the case. So a critique or a counterplan that had kind of an alternative that's not the status quo, you would want to put higher in the order. Yeah, Harrison.
Shouldn't it be procedurals, counterplans, Ks, DAs?
Well, no, not necessarily, because a K, if it's a floating pick, also solves your app, or if it's like a K that you don't have any answers to that's really, really threatening, or just like it links, it's very difficult to respond to. I would,
also
putting that for the counterplan.
and this is all also ties in with like the assess risk. Like if you're debating a K team, put the K higher. Yeah.
Oh, never mind, you just answered. I had.
Yeah, it should be based on both team and substance. If it's like the asteroids K, which I don't think responds to like half of the asteroids F, but it's a team that you know is going to go for the K, just put it earlier in the order because you've got to deal with it and you've got to get your best offense out there.
And then disadds last because you always have your app.
Yeah. The only exception to that would be if it's a disad that's going to outweigh your app. Like if it's a disad that gets to some absurdly large impact. Like there are some teams that love to go for disads and they'll just read. At the TOC, I judged a couple debates where the neg was just like reading multiple impacts to their DA and the 1 and C. That's something you might want to make a high priority, not before like counterplans and disads, but or Ks, but something that you might want to put before anything else that otherwise in the order, because that's going to be really threatening if you drop one of those impacts. Okay.
Yeah, okay, I kind of talked about this a little bit. This is extending your app impacts to the 2AC. Chalkboard space once again. Like I kind of said, and Steph can kind of add on to this, you always want to emphasize the app impact that's kind of the least touched on, First, you want to emphasize the app impact that the counterplan solves the least. So if you have a solvency deficit to a counterplan, and the counterplan doesn't solve your asteroids advantage, but does solve your exploration advantage, you clearly want to efficiently and effectively extend your big, huge asteroids advantage. Everyone understands that. It's pretty intuitive. The second kind of thing that I would think about is how much the case arguments interact. Like I said, if they drop an impact to one of your advantages, you clearly want to emphasize that advantage. And then the third thing is what we've been talking about, like where your app advantages solve the terminal impact to the DA. I don't think that you need to spend, and this is important, you should not spend a lot of time doing impact calculus in the 2AC. That's because
Definitely not comparative impact at all.
Because every judge in the country is going to let you get impact calculus in the 1AR and the 2AR. Nobody is really ever going to be like, oh, this wasn't extended well in the 2AC. You're going to get your app. So, you got to get the arguments out there as they are important. Like I said, the solvency deficit, the counterplan doesn't solve the asteroids advantage. That is a fast time frame. But spending a lot of time on impact calculus is inefficient because you're always going to get your app. Do you have questions?
Yeah, so does that preclude making brief arguments on the dissent about how the case outweighs, or should you just eliminate that?
Okay, 2 caveats that one is stuff like hedge solves the impact of the DA, that's great. You can throw that into the 2AC, that's good.
Yeah, that's
what I wouldn't do is
magnitude time frame probability.
Yeah, no, that's what the first thing is
stuff like that, not necessary. Thing about case arguments that I just want to go back to that Ryan said that's really important is when you write an app, you should write your impact so that it is clearly distinguishable / designed to answer the most predictable impact defense for that impacted debate. Example, if you're reading a hedge advantage, and you know that what's the most generic hedge impact defense argument everyone makes? Yeah, just like there are no challengers, okay? Or the one I guess that might be more applicable for this particular example I'm going to give is a lot of people will say like the U.S. is so far ahead economically and technologically that even if someone like maybe started rising up, they couldn't ever take out the U.S.
Preponderance of power.
Okay? So if that's the argument that you know that they're going to make, or it's just like a very good hedge impact defense argument, I think, because usually hedge advantages are kind of stupid, then, and like I love them, I'm just saying they're kind of stupid, is that you write your advantage to have built-in answers to their best impact defense. You'd be like, even if it's true that normally no other power could challenge the United States, in our particular scenario of US-China miscalc, China will feel use it or lose it pressures in which they will preemptively strike the United States, even if normally they know they could not beat us in a war. Something like that. Because if you've got a built-in, even if your card is not great on this, honestly, if you and the 2AC just are prepared every time someone reads this card to be like, here's my little spiel about how the card you read actually doesn't make any sense with the way we wrote our advantage, or our advantage is written to answer this explicitly in our 1AC. Even if your card's not super great on it, you might have another card that you can read in the 2AR later, or the 1AR, not 2AR, the 1AR later, that can make that argument for you, and it'll force them in a 2NC if they want to go for the case to very well interact with your case, as opposed to just being like, again, extend our books and hold for evidence, there are no challengers to hegemony. Because if they do that, the 1AR would be like, you dropped our spin, this doesn't apply. Does everyone get that? Distinguishing your impacts is so key to having a good app. Because then you still get to read all the best generic debate impacts, but you don't have to incur the problems with having to answer really good impact defense that everyone has. The last point I put on here I think is really worth talking about, which is when to kick an advantage. I would say you should almost never kick an advantage in the 2AC with two caveats, just because I think like, even if, let's say you have this advantage that's like, that belt advantage for the asteroids app, that is just like preposterous. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, that thing in every debate I've judged in where it's been in the 1AC, it has not made it into the 2AR for good reason. If you know that's the case and you know you've got an advantage like that, and the one on C reads like, 5 impact D cards, it's like BioD no, BioD no, BioD no, and extends all these makes all these analytics about your cards. I would still extend that advantage in the 2AC for like 20 seconds. The block has to, it's like a no risk option, right? The block has to go to it and extend that impact D, or you've got a 100% extinction bio scenario. Don't spend a long time answering every single argument they made. If you're using embedded clash on the case and you're very succinctly extending stuff, like just be like, group all their bio D arguments, no resiliency in a scenario where whatever your card says, and you just like really quickly extend it, they've still got to go there, and you don't ever have to go there again if you don't want to. But I wouldn't kick it just to kick it. There are two caveats to this. The first is if you are going to have no time to do that, and like you've got a big case, like let's say you've got 3 or 4 advantages, and they have a decent amount of case on every advantage, and it's like 8 off. Oh, you probably don't have time to do the head fake. So I would just kick one and like get out of there as fast as you can, so you can get to the off case region. So this is like time based. The second caveat to that is, and I've seen this in basically every practice debate I judged where this very belt advantage was read. If the 1NC reads a card on the case that messes up one of the strategies that they were reading in the debate, you should kick that advantage by conceding that card. Unless it's offense, then do not kick the advantage. So everyone, we're clear. Just assume that it's defensive. So
you guys did that right. Straight trying to get answer.
Yeah, if they have offense on your advantage, you can't kick it. And what we mean by offense is you make something worse, or your solvency mechanism exacerbates the problem, just like anything like that, or an impact turn to your impact, stuff like that. The impact turn do not kick. But I mean like debate with them. And see if I can hear them. So 1NC, they're like on your belt advantage. I don't know, I don't really know what the word is. Kuiper, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay, so they say no impact to biodiversity, the environment's resilient. Card. They've also introduced the spending disad with a warming impact in the 1NC. I'd be like, we're not going for this piece of a should advantage. However, you read a card that takes out the only impact to your dissat, because if the environment's resilient, there's no impact to resource depletion and deco as a result of warming.
That happens all the time.
You have no impact, you have no DA.
Especially in high school, it can happen to you all the time.
And then then you get to save yourself time of having to read a warming impacting card, because they read one for you. Now, don't do this if it's like a very, very big leap between the card that they read and what their impact is. So like, if they said no impact to, let's say your advantage is nuclear terrorism, and they read a no nuclear terrorism impact, and then they read a politics view with a cyber terrorism impact. Conceding no nuclear terrorism does not get you out of their cyber terror impact. Okay? I mean, you could certainly be like, and if their impact defense is true, it takes out their impact in politics because there's no means for terrorism. But you're probably still going to have to answer cyber terrorism separately. Is everyone clear on the difference between those two scenarios? It's really important. But I think these are basically the only two times where it's worth it to kick an advantage in the 2AC. Kicking advantages in the 1AR is great, very strategic, very useful to get time back in an already time-pressured speech. 2AC, don't think you have to do it unless you're in one of these two boats. And obviously, don't use this like conceding impact defense thing if that's like by far your best advantage and like the only way you're going to win a solvency deficit to a counterplan or something. I'm talking more about like throwaway advantages you don't really need, but you put in there because the 1A is really fast.
Alright, so next thing on the list, what are we at? 12?
No, this is supposed to be
13 now.
It's 13.
Alright,
It's
so
supposed
we're
to be
at
12.
13. Nice. We might have given a lot on the spot.
The
Alright,
last one actually was not made up on the spot.
no, that's the one she always wanted to end with. We're going to talk about when to straight turn. When to straight turn. Alright, when do you want to straight turn? When to straight turn.
You want to force them to go for a dissed?
Okay, yes, that is the point of straight turning, but when do you want to do it?
If your uniqueness and link turns or whatever cards are better, like
Okay, Harrison?
Isn't it more strategic to do it in the 1AR?
I kind of think so.
It depends.
It does depend.
Okay, here's an example. I don't think anyone reads stuff dispositionally anymore, but let's pretend that they did. And they read a counterplan dispositionally that you have impact turns to, and then they read a K that you're just like, what does this mean? You should straight turn the counterplan in the 2AC so you don't have to deal with their K ever again.
Okay, yeah.
I was gonna say when you don't have anything meaningful to say to something else they've read,
Right.
or you know you have the goods on them and they've read something that they don't know anything about, so you're like, well,
Right, so that's I kind of think the two conditions. The first is when you're just like, when it's something that kind of interacts poorly with something else that you're just like posed on. If you don't have answers to, like let's say that there's like, you know, there's a DA and case strategy in the 2 and R, and then there's politics and exo counterplan strategy. And you have absolutely nothing on the exo counterplan. You're just like, you know, you totally, you know, so maybe it's not the exo counterplan, but you know what I mean. The hypothetical. You have nothing to say to this counterplan. And there's a politics net benefit to it. What would you want to straight turn in that scenario? So the 2 and R, the two 2 and R options are, you know, like let's say it's the China DA and case, or a counterplan and politics, and you have nothing to say to the counterplan. Like just no solvency deficit. What do you want to do there?
China net benefit to the counterplan?
No, China's not a net benefit to the counterplan.
Straight turn China.
You straight turn China. Why would you do that?
Because you don't want them to go for it.
Exactly, because then it's not a net benefit to the counterplan, and that has to be in the 2 and R. Does that make sense? So that's kind of like.
If it's not effective to the cap plan, why wouldn't it solve back into
Am I
their
not right about
office?
that?
If it's not a net benefit to the counterplan, you straight turn.
Oh, you would straight turn politics.
You have to straight turn
You
politics.
straight turn
Yeah.
politics.
Okay, if it's a counterplan that you don't have answers to, you have to straight turn its net benefit. If it's a disad that you don't have answers to, you have to either straight turn something else that doesn't interact with. So like it forces that. Like if they've got see with no counterplan, it's really hard
Yeah.
to force them into one thing because if it's just a bunch of either it's a counterplan and you have to straight turn its net benefit, or you have to straight turn if it's just DAs and the one of the DAs.
Right.
And then just win that outweighs the other DAs. Like, you could straight turn the first of their 3 DAs and then only make defensive arguments, or you could like read some offense, but primarily defense on the other 2. Like 6 minutes of impact turns on the first DA, and then like split your rest of your time and the other 2 how you want to.
Wait, in that case, why would you straight turn politics then?
Because even if you have no answers to the counter plan, it doesn't matter. Because it only links to the plan, not the counter plan. Just concede their argument that it's a net benefit, and then just impact turn politics or link turn politics. Okay, I will say this is tricky sometimes. A lot of counter plans, especially more recently as people become more strategic about utilizing politics as a net benefit, are built to say that they solve the 2AC's link terms to politics, and then there's some very tricky reason why the plan is uniquely more unpopular than the counter plan. And so be careful about being like, I'm going to link turn politics because we're screwed on this counter plan, if their counter plan is going to solve all of your link turns. Because then you're like, you've got nothing, right? Does that make sense? Example, let's say your app is asteroid detection, and the counter plan is like it picks out of one part of the telescope. Like, let's stipulate this is competitive and all these other wonderful things in debate. Okay, they pick out of one type of the telescope that's put in space. If you're really good, granted really good, but still only about asteroid detection link turns are read in the 2AC. Like, let's say you have like got like 6 sweet turns. You're like, winners win, asteroid detection's popular, everyone loves space policy, everyone loves spending more money, whatever, all this stuff. The 2NC will get up and be like, yeah, that's all great, and all of those are solved by the counter plan, because the counter plan does all those things. It just picks out of this one really bad thing that we have a card that says costs more political capital than anything ever. Or this one particular senator doesn't like it and their key to skip it. Then you're in trouble. So make sure when you're link turning politics that it's not with a counter plan that's going to solve all of your link turns. Does everyone understand that? Okay, that's crucial. And the other component, obviously, is just punishing people for reading bad stuff. Like, if someone reads a throwaway 10-second Africa relations dissent, and you've got like the sickest Africa relations bad impact turns ever, just like do it. Like, so they didn't want to give a 2 and R on Africa relations. Like, they just threw it in there to kind of add more time to your 2AC, and you will punish them for that.
So that's the other kind of condition. If you have the goods, and so like there's the punishing, and there's like that we're in trouble, and those are kind of the 2 worlds where you straight turn. I don't really straight turn in the 2AC ever.
I did once this year at the NDT. This team read a counter plan that was a very similar situation where the app we were reading had amazing link turns to politics. Well, amazing is relative on the topic, but had very good link turns to politics, and normally we were fine on politics, but this counter plan that they read that we didn't really have answers to solved all of our best link turns, and so I just internal link turn politics.
So that's kind of like this scenario here, right?
I was like, we can't win a big link turn, we have to internal link turn or impact turn. So that's just something you have to do. You have to be, and again, we had all of these, we had all of these highlighted and like ready to go. Like, these were all, like, I knew what the arguments were, I was prepared. In fact, when we heard we were debating this team and we were app, I immediately found out what their politics VA was. One of my coaches was like, I taught these impact turns last night, and then I sat in a corner for 20 minutes and read them all. And was like, yeah, I can give a 2AR on this. If he had given it to me like 3 minutes before the debate started, I wouldn't have done it. Even if someone else highlighted them for me, because like, you're just not going to win.
It's really, I don't know. It's really hard to commit to giving a 2AR not on your app, and that's what you do when you're vectoring, right? It's warming, not neutral links.
One other thing about straight turning, if you want to wait till the 1AR, which I think you should basically almost always do if you can. Actually, in this debate, I take it back. I didn't only straight turn the 2AC. You give yourself an option to do that, and that's not just like giving your normal 2AC and then like boiling down on it in the 1AR. It's like I read like 6 or 7 cards of impact turns, and then I also read all of our normal link turns, but read no uniqueness for them. So all of the like normal like link turns. Does everyone get that strategy? If you want to impact turn, you can impact turn. So you're like saying, you know, like it's fine if we link to the dissent because the impact goes the other way. But just so you have defense, you can also be like, you can read your normal link turns without uniqueness. Because they're not, without uniqueness, what is a link turn? It's just defense. It's just the plan's popular. Thank you for the FYI. However, if the DA is going to pass anyway, it doesn't matter. This is crucial. Don't read uniqueness for dueling turns and read an impact turn or it's a straight turn.
Double turn.
Or double turn, sorry. Double turn.
Okay.
The opposite of a straight turn.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something that like I said, I don't really do it in 2AC, but I do think it can be very helpful in the 1AR if you're just getting hosed and you need to like make the 2NR, spread the 2NR out. I think that is a really good thing to keep in mind. Like if there are two DAs in the block and one of them you just like are getting destroyed and the other one's politics, you feel okay. Straight turning it can only make the 2NR a lot harder.
Okay, so the last one, which is like one of my favorite ones, just because I think people don't actually do this, and if they did, they'd be like 10 times better, is utilizing your 1AC and having a code system that goes along with it that makes it so you're like efficient and on a wavelength with your partner and the judge that the other team is not aware of. So what I mean by that is be honest, because the answer to this for me for a majority of my debate career was not often, was how many times in the 2AR does a 1AC card become something that you hand to a judge? Let's pretend this is not like a big case debate.
During the 2AR?
During the 2AR, how many, like a rough percentage of the cards that you actually go for and hand to the judge after the debate are ones from your 1AC? Assuming it's not a case debate. Yeah.
I think last year was a bit different though, because a lot of the kids had kind of really were interactive.
They were all at the case, yeah. Okay, what about like, I guess in the sophomores that's not the case, but like alt energy topic maybe? Is that a better example?
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't remember.
I forgot about that, that was years ago. Okay, my hopes. Let's pretend someone was like, not very often.
Not very often.
Okay, so here's kind of my thought about this. The 2A is probably, and by probably I mean like should definitely be the one that writes the 1AC. Okay? You research the app in this utopian world of mine where none of your coaches write any of your apps or anything like that. And so you've written this 1AC as a result of all of the amazing research that you've done. And how do you design a 1AC? Like what are the things that you need in this 1AC to make it so that it's like the best 1AC ever?
An advantage to solve all the impacts of the data.
Okay, big advantage. Sure.
Advantage off every portion of the 1AC.
I'm sorry?
Advantage for every aspect of the 1AC for like every action the plan would take.
Just like a lot of advantages, you mean?
And just, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean that kind of goes with this, just having a big app. But some people like to read small apps, so this is or an awesome advantage. Awesome small.
The biggest thing they'll take out of this lecture.
A big or awesome advantage. Or awesome small advantage. Okay? Yeah.
An app that like centers the negative to only be able to go for a few strategies, and that you're generally on the right side of.
Narrows neg options, and this can be either based on lit, competition, or topic relevance. Okay, so I want to say a few things about this just before we go into other things about
Do you have
the
something to add really fast?
Or do you have a different point?
Yeah, I have a different
Okay,
point.
can you wait? Can you just
Yeah.
remember it? Okay, so there are two ways to do this. You can narrow the neg options by reading an app that is questionably topical and just be like, they have to go for T. We don't link to any topic disads, just like you're good at T and you can beat them, that your app is topical. Okay? That's one way you can do this. T, question mark? Okay, the second thing you could do is you can read an app that just like after doing research, it's like unquestionably topical, part of the topic, like coin, okay? It didn't really narrow the neg options insofar as it linked to everything, but you're on the right, am I wrong about this, or wasn't the coin app generally on the right side of almost all unique dispositions? So you're just like, you are right. And obviously in debate, no one's ever right, quote unquote, but like, you are, if they impact turn, if they try to straight turn your case, you're on the right side of uniqueness pretty frequently. If they try to read a counter plan that uses an alternate mechanism, the literature is on your side that your mechanism is superior, and there's comparative evidence about that mechanism. This is like for your plan, how you write your plan, but it's also about your solvency mechanism and what kind of cards there are. Like, if you write a really sweet plan that like doesn't make any counter plans competitive, and then you don't have any solvency mechanism for it, someone will at some point during the year write a counter plan that smokes your ass. Like, just someone will do it. Okay? So make sure these two things match up. It's like very, very important. And not only do they match up, but these cards are awesome. They're like, this plan is the only thing that could ever do anything ever. It's better than any other option. You're never going to find all those cards, but just, this is my utopian world. Okay, so these are like crucial ways to do this to make your 1AC better. And again, just remember this T thing, I'm not strongly recommending it. It failed for me pretty largely once before, but if you're good at topicality and you've got good T cards that defend your app, that's maybe something you want to think about for like a new app at some big tournament that you care about, because if you can practice T like 100 times before that tournament and it's the only thing they can go for because they don't link to anything else, you're going to be in a good spot.
Yeah.
Judge dependent, obviously, right? Okay, who else had an idea for what to do with your 1AC? Yeah.
Multiple internal links to the same thing.
Sure, okay. Lots of internal links.
What is that?
I think just in general, I'm going to call this point diversity. So I know some apps are great and they just have one giant advantage and they just kill everyone, and like we have a bunch of internal links to this advantage, and that's awesome. That's one type of diversity, that's called internal link diversity. Another type of diversity is impacts. I was a fan of this particularly, just like your 1AC has like 25 impacts in it. No 1NC is ever going to cover your case. Just never. I mean, they will on solvency, obviously, but if any neg wants to credibly go for the DA in the case, and like the case being impact defense, the 1NC is going to have to spend like 4 minutes on case.
You know, that's very team dependent too. One of those is really great against counter plans, and one of those is really great against DA case teams, right? Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, let's say 6 years, you're a senior in college and you're writing an app to beat the hated enemy. You want to think about stuff like that and how you construct your 1HP.
That make sense? All right, what else besides diversity? Yeah.
Sneaky preempts.
Okay. What do you mean sneaky? Like, I mean, I love sneaky, but what do you mean?
Like, I don't know, this might be different for a lot of people, but in Colorado, you like have to have a separate solvency flow, so we would like hide our answers to their like really common solvency arguments and our advantages.
Yeah, that's smart.
Okay.
That's good.
All right, putting stuff out of order. That's tricky. I like that. What else? What other kind of and I'll wrap with this, because some of them are sneaky and some of them are just strategic. What's like another kind of preempt that's smart to put in your 1AC?
Just specific cards that answer generic case defense arguments.
Right.
Yeah.
Not just case defense.
Or also
case offense. If there's just offense. If there's a particular counter plan that you just debate every freaking debate, just put a card in your 1AC that's like the card, like there was this card last year where I read it in every 2AC, and finally I was like, this card sucks to read in the 2AC, and I just made my partner read it. Okay, so just like 2AC typical cards.
You know, like against counter plans, what do you need this year? You need like a space key warrant, you need a US key warrant, and you need like a government, not private warrant. So those are things to like put in the 1AC.
Privatization counter plan, I definitely have a card in my 1AC that's like,
right.
Here's why private is comparatively worse, or here's why private fails for asteroids, or something like that, right? Because that's just a 2AC typical card. Same thing goes for case arguments. If you are reading the asteroid app and every 2AC you have to read like 1 or 2 cards to answer the fact that there's no political support for colonizing Mars, just throw a card in your 1AC that's like, and like most recent evidence says that we can do it.
Yeah.
You know, just like something like you want to write your 1AC to maximize 2AC efficiency, and a component of that is making it so that you don't have to read unnecessary cards. If your 1A can read it, put it in the 1AC. If they complain about it, tell them you'll give them $5 if they can get to the bottom of the 1AC. It's shockingly effective. Okay? Just put what you need to in the 1AC and have the 1A figure it out. Because, like, you know, they're the 1A. They can do that to you with the 1AC. It's reciprocal. Other things that anyone can think of that would be good preempts? What about like if you're debating a one-off cake team? How about like our impacts are true and scientifically verifiable? Or like the role of the ballot should be political simulation. Here's our civic engagement card.
I do have a caveat to that.
Don't do it against a team that's going to do stupid shit like picking out a framework. Okay?
Well, that's not my caveat. My caveat, but that is true. There
are teams that will do that.
Like just to be annoying or whatever. But it does sound kind of bad at the end of your 1AC if instead of kind of telling a coherent narrative, say about framework or rule of the ballot, if you just start reading like no impact to biopower, and reps don't come first.
That's not the kind of cards you should put in your 1AC.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying not to do.
Yeah, no, but like also don't put them at the end.
Well, yeah, it just sounds really bad when you're listening to a 1AC and they're debating a K team and it's like policy, and now every kind of K amalgamation I can think of.
I would say like, let's say, I think the best card to add to your 1AC if this can't presume, let's presume we only were ever going to have the asteroid death, is, I know, just bear with me, is to assume that when they read that asteroids, okay, what's the best offense argument you have to win against asteroids? Let's pretend that it actually answered the other half of the case. What?
Asteroid threats are real.
Sure. Asteroid threats are real, / science is good, and not every scientist is an evil science fiction book writing man or woman. Okay, so I would add a card to my asteroid advantage, not just at the end of the 1AC when the 1A has time. I would build it into the advantage so it tells a coherent story where it's like, most recent studies say asteroid attack is coming, whatever, and these studies are empirically verifiable and science is a good way to make predictions. Card. I would probably change the tag in the file that's like, we're not a narrative, you know, so it makes more sense with your 1AC, but stuff like that, I think it's useful, and it can't get you into trouble.
Right.
If you're at all worried about what a team might do in response to your preempts, take it out. Should only be no risk options. Like, what additional offense are they going to get if you add a card about why asteroid science is good? Nothing, because you already made that argument in your 1AC, just not in a K-friendly way. I guess, like, so be careful about the, like, roll of the ballot stuff if you're worried people are going to pick out of it.
Right.
Or if they're going to, like, use that as an additional, if like, a team has a really good public sphere K, don't read that in the 1AC, maybe save it for the 2AC, stuff like that.
But no, like, hey, preempt dump, because that always just sounds...
And don't read stuff like impact events because you don't know, because you don't know what their impact will be.
Yeah.
Don't read, like, U4 always VTL, because you don't know if they're going to have a VTL argument.
Right.
Or don't read like ontologies on a prerequisite because it might be a reps K or an epistemology K, right? Is everyone with me on that? Okay. Okay, so these are all important things for designing your 1AC, but once you've designed your 1AC, what is the value of it? Like and I don't just mean like, why do you have a 1AC to present an app? But like, what is the value of having these things in your 1AC? Name an example of a time where you need something in your 1AC. Okay, sure. It's your case, right? You don't have a case if there's no 1AC, which sounds like stupid and counterintuitive, but like, obviously, your 2AC on the case would be like a living nightmare if you had to read all of your solvency cards in the 2AC. So there is a particular reason why you've chosen to read like 5 cards in your 1AC that all sound very similar and are all maybe by the same author that all say very similar things. To save you time and to build a coherent story. So I like to call this, I guess I just erased it. I like to call this the code system. And that's that after you've designed your 1AC flawlessly, as we've just described, you want to do things like read all of your cards. Like I would just say this, once you've had your 1AC, I would always sit down with it like 3 times at least and be like, here are all of the different like little phrases in all of my cards that I'm going to use to make them my app. So, all right, let's say, what's an example? Give me a phrase from one of the asteroids cards. Just like a real...
Solves inevitable extinction.
Well, I don't mean from the tags, I mean from the cards.
Nobody knows.
Do you have the asteroids app on your computer?
It's like any phrase.
I like the weekend.
You just muttered, I don't know what you said, what?
Forget about the app.
Oh, that's fair. Grab me a solvency card. Yeah.
Active observer. Click on the link.
If I just cut another card that says try or die, would like everybody regain?
Find 90% of all greater than, whatever.
Let's see if that exists.
No, it doesn't. If you Google search objective observer. No, a card that's like extinction.
No, a blackout scenario in which death prevents sunlight from reaching your impact card.
Wait, what is the code system?
Deep space infrared.
Whatever that blackout that blocks the sun.
Okay, this or no, just to give an idea. Okay, this is all just from like 1 or 2 cards. I would make this my impact buzzword for the asteroids advantage. I would make this my like solvency deficit kind of framing.
Just like things that are in when I see them.
Yeah, use the language of the cards.
Okay, the cards are there and they're good. And now you have to take those cards and figure out what about them you can pull out and slowly put in every speech until it just becomes like an entire story in the 2AR. So in my 2AC on the case, if they're like, solve asteroids, I'd be like, actually extend our whatever evidence, deep space infrared is key to actually detecting asteroids. Can't see 90% now, is that the argument about 90%? Can't see 90% now, catastrophic risk highly likely. Impacts extinction causes a blackout scenario that blocks out all the sunlight. Try or die. Okay, that's the 2AC quick blippy on the case. Uses all these lines. Your partner, who is also very involved in affirmative work and in affirmative understanding, will then give their 1AR on the case or on the solvency deficit to a counterplan or on impact health, and will throughout their speech also use all of these different code words. And you shouldn't just have 3. Like you should base it on the cards and not the other way around and have like a quota. Just like whatever feels right about the cards that you know are going to be in every 2AR. Those are the cards, or those are the kind of code words that you should have with your partner. So the 1AR goes, they use all of these. The 2NC is just like, okay, this is a normal 1AR, whatever. And then the 2AR starts their framing by being like blackout outweighs everything, or like, just like, like, this sounds stupid because it's a stupid impact, but stuff like that. Or you can start your solvency deficit by being like, even if the counterplan is necessary to asteroid detection, it's not sufficient because we can't see 90%, so that 10% is enough to trigger extinction. That framing is blown up in the 2AR, even though it was like a minuscule, quick, blippy component of the 2AC, which then became a smaller argument in the 1AR, which then became the entirety of the thesis of the 2AR. Does everyone understand how it goes from like, the like evolution is blip, goes to arg, and okay, just so you know, when I'm saying blip, I'm not meaning like just say blackout, because people are going to be like, what are you talking about? But like actually make the argument and make sure the code word is involved there. Then argument development, so then thesis/story. Is everyone good on that? Does everyone understand that? So here's an example of this. Last year in one of our 1ACs, we had a solvency card that said that if the H-1B cap was left in place, there would be a business panic about when the lottery would fill for the rest of the visas, and that would cause business uncertainty and destroy the economy and all this other great debate stuff. So basically every 2AR I gave on a solvency deficit, I would start by being like, the counterplan still triggers business panic. And then I would use that phrase as like my launching pad into an entire description of business uncertainty and what that meant for the economy. But it's not as effective if I had not also used that phrase in the 2AC on the case when they were like, the caps, there's all causes to the economy. I'd be like, no, business panic is the only internal link to to uncertainty and like the dollar climbing or whatever, the dollar declining or whatever. And just like, it doesn't have to be a big emphasis early on, but it's there. And then my partner, when he's extending the solvency deficit on the counterplan, is like, we have 3 solvency deficits, like A sub point is panic, explanation, B sub point is whatever, explanation. And all of those are there, it's gonna be like so much better. Your 2AR is just gonna sound so much more tied to the rest of the debate than if you had just like started out your speech by being like, here's why they don't solve our economy advantage. It's like and here's the best thing about this. It's only like, you might think right now it's only a very marginal stylistic difference for giving a speech. What do you do when you go for a solvency deficit? You present evidence, right? And then you hand that evidence to a judge. That judge is going to read that evidence and see, because you strategically cut your card to box or underline or bold the important buzzwords that you're also using for this system. They're going to see that phrase and be like, oh my god, this totally matches up with what the 2AR was saying. It's not like a lie like half of all 2ARs ever. And so when that matches up with what you're actually saying, it's like 10 times more persuasive to a judge. Like, the amount of times, like, last year where, like, a judge would call for our cards and be like, I was shockingly surprised at how much of your 2AR was actually supported by your evidence. But that's just because people thought I was, like, a liar about stuff in general. It's really, really useful for getting a judge kind of on your side. For solvency deficits, it's not just for solvency deficits. Let's say it's a big DA case debate, and like you're going for case outweighs. You're like, we actually have a scenario, you're using the like buzzwords from your impact evidence and explaining it and how it interacts with their evidence. You're giving examples of different regional wars that would occur in a world of hegemonic collapse that are in your impact evidence in your 1AC. And then, God forbid, it's not the Kagan, and hopefully it's not the Kagan card, and someone calls for it, and they like actually see that you're outlining specific parts of your evidence and drawing them out into actual debate. You're going to be in such a better position than if you were just like, look, you read the Kagan card, you know what it says, obviously there's hedge impact, obviously it's really big, it causes regional wars. You're like, here are the 6 scenarios, here's how each of them interact with your impact, and here's why even though you have a large risk of your DA, our case outweighs it. Does that make sense to everyone? If you can effectively employ this strategy, it not only makes you more efficient, but it just makes you sound better. It makes you sound like you know what you're talking about. There's nothing worse than a 2AR that's like substantively really good, but it just sounds like it's all over the place because you have no coherent ties to the 1AR or the 2AC even.
You know, and a good way to practice this too is like as you're getting familiar with an app, write 2AC blocks that use the language of your cards. And eventually, you know, you'll wean yourself off of those and you'll kind of internalize them, and then it'll just be kind of autopilot. When you're talking about, you know, your internal language, you'll use the language of the cards. That's kind of a good way to practice that. Do you want to just give the dictate the terms of the block spiel and then call it a day?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I really like do the kind of the 2AC is about. Okay, like the kind of last thing that we'll say is, and this is just kind of a very abstract thing to think about what the 2AC means, and it's all about dictating the terms of the block. You know, the way you win debates is when you force the other team to debate you on what you want to talk about. You should always be determining what the 2NC says. You tell them that they have to answer this add-on, and they are playing catch-up the entire debate because your 2AC is so offensive and so about your app that the 2NC is playing catch-up from the moment you start.
Offensive, just to clarify.
Offensive. So that's just kind of like, you know, the last thing. You always want to be telling the other team what they're doing in their speeches, and if you can effectively do that, that's how you win app debates. When the 2NC does not do what he wants to do or she wants to do, you know, that's kind of dictating the terms of the block. It's just kind of like a cool phrase to think about yourself and kind of get yourself jazzed for delivering 2AC terrorism. All right.
Do you have any other questions about the 2AC?
Yeah, what's up?
Sometimes I don't know whether on a disad to read impact defense or an add-on that accesses the impact. Do you have any suggestions that if I have to choose one?
I mean, you should always try to read both, but it probably depends on if your add-on is good or not, right?
How good's your add-on?
I mean,
It's like a sit down.
If your add-on is really good, what I might suggest doing, this is again, judge-dependent, high risk, high reward. You always, always, always want to have impact defense on their impacts because there's nothing worse than just like losing because they just had some D on yours and you had nothing. Is to maybe read the impact defense card and explain how your app would access that impact. Kind of what we were talking about with the politics thing. Very similarly, be like, and our apps would do the following 4 things that would boost it just as well. And then choose in the 1AR whether you want to go in for impact D or if you want to go with add-on. You should just do it based 100% on which cards are better. If you can win that your add-on is like awesome and definitely sells better internally to warning, like here's an example, the spending DA. If you had an add-on for your app that was like, our app costs China and India, what am I saying? If China and India started capping their emissions or cutting their emissions after the plan, you should read that add-on, and I wouldn't even probably read because if you solve their impact better than they do, you should just read it and be like, you read an impact for us. And then instead of impact defense, I would read internal link defense.
Right.
So like
defense to earth sciences or whatever.
Earth sciences can't solve warming card, and here's our add-on that we solve warming, concede the impact, we access extinction, and you know. But if your add-on is kind of bad, maybe just make the analytic that you solve it and read impact defense. Or read both ideally, but if you can't, choose based on the strength of the add-on.
Anything else? No questions?
See you all later.
That was a very technical. You gotta get loud. You gotta get angry.
I would just, if it's a big deal, like,
What? He, is it?
I was gonna make a